Here we're looking at a ramp, aka on-ramp or entrance ramp. There are a number of points that we want to bear in mind when it comes to such an on-ramp. Firstly, in most cases, but not always, there will be a lead section which allows any vehicles traveling along the on-ramp to be able to build up their speed and thereby be able to sync their speed with any vehicles traveling along the main road so as to be able to merge a lot easier. Secondly, for any vehicles traveling along the on-ramp, they cannot just assume that because there would be such an island section that they're safe on this side of the island section. We'll see in a couple of videos that are to follow that there could be an incident higher up which would cause the vehicles to actually cross over or traverse that island section. And then the third point is that for any vehicles traveling in the main lane, just as is the case with the fork, it's safer not to travel in the lane that is adjacent to the merging on-ramp lane. And so if possible, if there are multiple lanes, rather to be in the lane that's further from the merging on-ramp, and that allows a bit of a buffer zone. Let's advance the video, and you'll see that the yellow vehicle is traveling far too slowly in order to be able to merge safely with the traffic in the main lane. Over and above that, for any vehicles behind that are traveling faster, now that poses a danger of them rear-ending such a slower moving vehicle. Or, as we'll see in the animation, the driver of the red vehicle is forced to actually have to try and bypass the yellow vehicle and pulls into the main lane, cuts across the path of the green vehicle, and there's an incident. So just to emphasize this point of the speed along the on-ramp and the merging section, the idea is to build up your speed so as to be able to flow or merge into the main lane of traffic a lot quicker. So never travel slower than the speed of the vehicles that you're wanting to merge with. And that's the idea of this lead section. The higher the speed differential, in other words, the greater the speed of the main lane of traffic relative to the speed of the vehicle wanting to merge, the higher that speed differential, the more difficult it's going to be to try and merge into that main lane of traffic. So you never want to slow down or even worse, come to a full stop in the merging lane. Unlike in the animation where I pointed out the lead section, you can see this on-ramp or entrance ramp doesn't have such a lead section. So in a case such as this, the driver of any vehicles wanting to merge need to make extra caution or need to take extra caution to ensure that there are no vehicles that are traveling in this lane when they're wanting to merge. Or if there is a vehicle in this lane, that either one of two things, that the vehicle's far enough behind the point of wanting to merge so that this vehicle has the space and the time to build up speed without having to slow down the approaching vehicle, or if the vehicle had enough of a view while coming down the on-ramp to actually see any approaching vehicles in the main lane, that at that point the vehicle wanting to merge could have built up its speed so that when it does cross over into the merging lane, that it doesn't slow down any vehicles coming up from behind. So that's a point we want to bear in mind, whether it's an on-ramp or any time we're actually changing lane. We need to make sure that when we do so, we don't slow down any vehicles that are already traveling in that lane. So that's a very strict rule to follow. Never change a lane where you're going to slow down vehicles that are already traveling in that lane. So yeah, the driver should have held back, waited for the camera to pass, but instead just pulls out ahead of the camera. Fortunately, the camera was alert. Here we've got the on-ramp or entrance ramp. We said that it's best for any vehicles in the main lane not to be in the lane that's adjacent the on-ramp, And so we see the camera is here in a lane that's separated, has a bit of a buffer zone between any merging vehicles and the lane that the camera is traveling in. But even in this scenario, one can't just assume that you're safe because you're not in the adjacent lane. You also can't assume that because there's a solid white line that no vehicles will cross over that line. So in this particular clip, we see that there is a slower vehicle ahead of a faster moving vehicle. So this vehicle wants to pull out from behind the slower moving vehicle, but also notices that in the main lane of traffic is another slower moving vehicle. So now the driver has to actually traverse more than one lane in order to bypass these slower vehicles, cuts across the solid white line, and there's a slight collision with the camera. Just going to stop at this point. So to repeat what was mentioned in a previous video, whenever you see a vehicle crossing a lane, never assume that the vehicle will just cross that one or that single lane. Always expect when you see a vehicle crossing a lane that the vehicle is going to cross multiple lanes. Just assume that that would be the case. And in that way, you can be better prepared, such as happened in this clip, to be able to adjust your speed accordingly or to try and avoid the drive of this vehicle. So similar to the previous clip, we have a merging lane here, an on-ramp or an entrance ramp, slower vehicle ahead in both the on-ramp as well as the main lane of traffic. So as we advance the video, you'll see that this driver is coming up at a greater speed, is very impatient. And so for the camera, there are a number of warning signs that he could look out for to be aware of what would arise. Let's advance it. So we see at this point, the driver of this vehicle being impatient, already wanting to cross over the island sections. So because of that, we know that if he's already at this stage wanting to pull out from behind the slower moving traffic, that it's unlikely now he's just going to stay in that lane behind the truck. That he's more than likely going to want to cross multiple lanes to get into the faster moving lane of traffic. And that's exactly what happens. So a little bit of a different situation in this clip. We don't have slower moving traffic ahead. So you'll see as we advance the video, there's no traffic to slow down the driver of this vehicle. Nonetheless, there are other warning signs that the camera could be aware of. Firstly, not to assume that once again, because there's a solid line, that no vehicles would cross over that line. Now I'm just going to advance this to a point. I'm just going to stop it at this particular point because notice that the driver of this vehicle, where his vehicle is positioned within his lane, is right over to the left side of the lane. And so that's one warning sign. Whenever you see a vehicle positioned to the side of a lane, then know that there's a great chance that the vehicle's wanting to pull into the lane adjacent to that. So if you see the vehicle's positioned on the left side of the lane, then know that there's a great likelihood that the driver is going to want to cross over into the lane next to that. If he was on the right-hand lane and there was another lane just to the side of that, then there's a chance he would have wanted to cross over into the right-hand lane. So that's the one warning sign for the camera, where he's positioned within the lane. Secondly, and this is another strict rule to follow, never travel at the same speed alongside another vehicle where your vehicles overlap. So you can see that the front of this vehicle is actually overlapping with the back of this vehicle, and they're traveling at about the same speed. And whenever you're in that situation, you don't have much of an escape route or room to play with if a vehicle then cuts across your path. Now, I just want to go back a bit and let's just advance it. At this point, what could have happened is that the driver of this vehicle may have checked his rear view mirror to see if there are any approaching vehicles. But this vehicle would have been out of the range of that rear view mirror. So he could have checked his rear view mirror and not have seen any vehicles which would have been behind this vehicle. But because this vehicle is more in the blind spot, so not in the range of the rear view mirror, and also not visible from the driver if he was to have looked towards his left. So if you look towards his left, he wouldn't have seen a vehicle, and also if he had looked in his rear view mirror, he wouldn't have seen a vehicle. So this camera would have been in his blind spot, and so could possibly explain why when he had got to the point he thought it was clear and then crossed over the lane. So it would have been better if the camera had actually held back a little bit, and then this incident wouldn't have occurred. In this animation, I want to just demonstrate the point of speed differential. So we see we've got a ramp, an on-ramp or an entrance ramp, merging with the main lane of traffic. And so there's enough of a lead section, although it tapers, there's enough of a lead section for any vehicles traveling down the ramp to be able to merge with the main lane of traffic. And had that not been the case, let's just say that the lane of vehicles here were tightly packed so as not to allow enough space for the merging vehicle, there's still quite a bit of a shoulder area for the vehicle to travel along to ensure that he has enough speed in order to merge with the speed of the approaching vehicles. In this case, as I progress the animation, you see that this red vehicle has actually slowed down and come to a stop. Now, at this point, the speed differential between the red vehicle and these other vehicles is very high. And so now for this red vehicle to be able to merge and build up enough speed again is going to be extremely difficult. There could still be behind this white vehicle a whole line of vehicles behind him, and so now it makes it very difficult for him to be able to merge. Plus there's the danger that any other vehicles traveling along the ramp might rear end him because of the speed that they're traveling, and perhaps not looking out ahead of them, but looking to the side for any vehicles traveling in the main lane, and so not quite being aware of the vehicle ahead of them, now having come to a stop. So there's that danger. So I just want to show the difference between that and what's depicted in the animation now to follow, where the red vehicle is traveling at speed in order to merge easily. And so see, it's a lot easier if you're traveling either at the same speed as the lane of vehicles that you're wanting to merge with, or even faster than that lane of vehicles. Because if you're traveling faster, it's easier to slow down so as to avoid the vehicle directly ahead of you than what it is to try and accelerate to get ahead of the vehicle that is behind you. So either merge at the same speed or even traveling faster, and then it's not a problem. In this animation, there are a number of points we can pick up. Now notice that the driver of this truck actually sees this car wanting to merge into the main lane and does the right thing. So as we progress the video, you'll see that he actually moves over into the left lane to allow him the space to be able to merge. And so he doesn't have any other vehicles to look out for. So he could have actually merged quite safely. Plus he's got quite a lead section ahead of him. Plus, in the case of an emergency, a shoulder to the road that he could have traveled along. So there would be no restrictions for this driver to have accelerated in order to merge safely. But he does exactly the wrong thing and slows down unnecessarily. And now, because he's traveling very slowly and the passing traffic is passing at a much higher speed differential. Now it's going to be very difficult for him to merge. So never slow down, and even worse, come to a stop on an on-ramp. In this clip, you'll see that there's not any lead section for this vehicle to be able to build up speed to merge with the main lane of traffic. And so this vehicle should have waited for any passing traffic. So just to repeat the point again, never cross over or merge into a lane where the approaching traffic is forced to have to slow down. So you should be able to merge without any traffic having to slow down. And the only way to accomplish this is to either enter or merge into the lane, traveling at the right speed, so no traffic has to slow down, or that there's enough space or buffer zone between yourself merging and the approaching vehicle so that by the time they get to you, you've already built up enough speed within that lane. This isn't the case. Driver just pulls ahead. Now notice he does have a bit of a shoulder section that he could have traveled along, but this particular driver is not only wanting to cross this one lane, but is actually trying to get into this lane. And so we have the incident. So you wouldn't have been able to see any vehicles approaching from the right-hand lane. So there should have been no reason for him to want to even enter into this lane to start off with, let alone into a faster moving lane that he can't see. So this real life clip is just showing what I explained a little bit earlier on in the animation, that when you get to the island section of the ramp, you can't assume that you're safe on this side of the island section. You see the wet road conditions, and so this particular vehicle, this bus, for some or other reason has been induced into a slide, and so actually cuts right across the path of this ramp, this on-ramp, just to illustrate that point. In this real-life clip, we'll see that the driver of this vehicle actually cuts across the path of the camera, this truck. Now that could be for the reason that when you look at the road, the way it's laid out, it looks as though this lane actually continues along into this lane. When you follow this line here, which is the division in the construction of the road, and so this driver may have just assumed that this lane continues straight, instead of sticking to the right side of the lane and realizing that this is a totally separate lane for the higher speed traffic. Now for the camera, he could have noticed as well the angle of this vehicle. So you can see this vehicle is positioned whereby it's angled to actually cross over into this lane. Had this driver wanted to follow these vehicles and actually stick to this lane, he wouldn't have been angled at this position. He would have been angled more directed towards the vehicles that are ahead of him. So that could have been a warning sign for the camera. In this particular clip, we've got the merging lane over here. We'll see as we advance the video that there's more than enough space for the vehicle traveling along the ramp, the entrance ramp, to be able to build up speed before merging into the main lane, but doesn't do so, crosses directly over into the path of the camera. So for the camera, just to repeat the point, we go back a section. It would have been safer in this scenario, provided that there's enough space in the lane just to the right of him, to rather have moved over into this lane, so that should a vehicle cross over into the main lane, then the camera would have been out of danger. But this wasn't the case. In this clip, the number of points that we can pick up. So as we advance it, you'll see that immediately there's a truck that's traveling along the ramp or the entrance ramp, traveling slower, and so any vehicles coming up behind the truck would want to pull out from behind the truck. As we mentioned also in a previous video, that where you find vehicles behind a larger vehicle, so be it either a truck or a bus, there's a great chance that such a driver would want to pull out from behind the larger vehicle for two reasons. One, that the vehicle invariably is traveling a lot slower, and secondly, the driver's visibility is restricted behind such a larger vehicle, and so it's less safe to be traveling behind such a vehicle, and so they're more than likely wanting to pull out from behind the vehicle. So immediately, the camera should have realized that that would have been the case, that these vehicles would want to pull out from behind the truck. Now the camera is in a lane that is separated from the merging lane, and so should be safer in this position as opposed to this lane. But now notice what the camera does. He decides that he's actually going to cross over into this lane. Now the driver of this van over here could have checked his rear view mirror and noticed that this lane is clear, and so decided it's fine to pull across out from behind the truck into this lane. And although he doesn't indicate, he does pull out, maybe thinking that it's clear. And so for the camera, one can't just assume that because the driver of this van hasn't indicated that he's not going to pull out into this lane. So just assuming because there's no indicator or turning circle, or turning signal rather, that a vehicle won't want to change lane. So one can't make that assumption. So the camera does pull into the middle lane, and there's almost a collision there. So although the driver of the van was in the wrong in not indicating his intentions to actually pull out, in this clip I would hold the camera more responsible because he was in a position to be able to read the situation a lot easier. There was no compelling reason for him at that point to pull into the middle lane. He could have waited until the danger was passed before moving into the middle lane in order to bypass that slower vehicle ahead of him. So he was more in control of the situation than what the driver of the van was. Now this is a bit of an interesting clip because what's happening over here, I'm just going to stop it at this point. You can see that there's a truck ahead of this van pulling out into the main lane, and the reason why the truck is doing that is that there was some incident with two vehicles just ahead of the truck which are stopped in the lane, and that's why the truck is pulling out to bypass these vehicles that are stationary on the road. But there are two dangers here. Firstly, the road conditions are wet. So for any vehicles traveling along the faster lanes, it's going to be more difficult for them to stop in time or slow down in order to avoid hitting this truck that's pulling out into the faster traffic. So that's one thing. And when you have a look at this lane, you can see that it's a faster moving lane. And so the vehicles traveling down here would be coming at a much higher speed. So that combined with the wet road conditions makes it a lot more dangerous for any vehicles now to pull out into these lanes. But the truck pulls out nonetheless, and so we find that there is this collision. I just want to go back a little bit here because I want to stop it at a specific point, just at this point. So the driver of the van could have noticed that there is enough space on this side of the road in order to bypass these stationary vehicles, and that would have been a lot safer to do than moving over into the left lane in order to bypass them. So if you find yourself in a situation like this where you could either bypass these stationary vehicles along the side of the faster moving traffic or on the side where there would be no traffic at all, then it would be obvious to take the safer option. In this last clip that we're looking at in this video, we see that the driver ahead does exactly the wrong thing. We've got this on-ramp or entrance ramp, and as we progress the video, you can see, if I stop it at this point, that he's actually ahead of this pickup truck with the trailer. So all he needed to do was just to accelerate slightly. He would have been ahead of this vehicle and no problem in merging. But instead, actually slows down and poses a danger to this approaching camera. So now, just to emphasize this point, speed differential for him is a lot higher for any passing traffic. Going to be extremely difficult for him to have to try and merge now with that passing traffic. Plus the danger to the vehicles coming up behind him. Please like, subscribe, and get notified.